Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Addiction Help Podcast, where we discuss the latest in news, sports, entertainment, pretty much anything else going on in the world as it pertains to addiction and addiction recovery. I am your host, Dan Hauser. With me today, Jessica Miller, the editorial director for AddictionHelp.com. Hi, Jessica. How you doing today?
Great. How's it going?
It is going pretty well. So
not bad for a Monday.
Not bad for a Monday. Not bad for a Monday for sure. Not bad for a first ever recording of the Addiction Help Podcast too.
I know.
Name Heck pending.
Yeah, right.
So without further ado, let's just get right into the meat of the action. So for our main topic today, I think we are going to discuss the groundbreaking FDA announcement from last week. The FDA announced that Narcan will now be available over the counter. So you will no longer need a prescription to get Narcan, a very much life-saving medication, which is just a absolutely fantastic piece of information that we got last week.
Right. Although, not everyone necessarily either understands why that's such a big win, or I think there's still some misinformation out there about people and why that's needed and why that's helpful and actually a good thing. Like, this is a good thing. And I've seen some conversation about it where people are like, well, but we'll get into all that.
Absolutely. And that's why we are here today. So for those of you that Jess might have been describing that you either don't know what Narcan is, you don't know about the article, you have no clue what we're talking about, and you think we're speaking in a foreign language right now, let's go ahead and give you a quick summary / rundown of what's happening before we get into the meat of conversation. So first of all, Narcan, it is a life-saving medication. It essentially will reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. So if somebody were to be experiencing an opioid overdose, you or a first responder or whoever may have it could apply Narcan to that person, and it would help keep them from dying in the interim while medical personnel is able to arrive and perform proper professional medical care and attention to that person.
And it's essentially like a nasal spray too, right? So, it's relatively easy to use. It's not, even like EpiPens, which are pretty common and useful for people. It's not even as complicated. To me, that's complicated. Maybe that's just me, but
an EpiPen,
absolutely. Shooting somebody in the leg, you got to do it a certain way, but this is just a nasal spray that you can apply. So that's a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. The fact that it's going to be a nasal, the same way that you would take some Afrin and spray it if your nose is stuffed up. Yeah, exactly. So that's fantastic. So up until now, so first off, Narcan, and I have to admit, when we were preparing for today's podcast episode, I actually learned this. I assumed that Narcan, like I'm sure so many other people out there, was a relatively new invention, creation, something newer to our society over the last maybe decade or so, as kind of more attention has been brought to opioids and opioid overdoses.
Right.
We're fighting the opioid epidemic in this country, but actually Narcan was invented, created, whatever word you'd like to use, introduced to society all the way back in 1971. So this is actually something that's
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So this is not even a little bit new. Now, I'm sure most people are like us, where we've learned about it maybe in the last 10, 15 years, kind of like I said, as the country as a whole has kind of had their eyes opened up to opioids and the dangers behind them. But so like you mentioned, so this specific version, Narcan, isn't a nasal spray. Narcan is actually a version of naloxone. Naloxone is the actual medication itself that reverses it. So naloxone is actually available in multiple different forms that we've seen over the years. Narcan itself is in the nasal spray form. So up until last week when this announcement was made, it was available. And over the last, I would say 10, 15 years or so, it's become more and more accessible to first responders, treatment facilities, hospitals, nonprofits, and other centers and facilities that have gone out and tried to help educate the public on, this very, very important life-saving thing, but it's only been available via prescription. So as anyone who's ever been to a doctor or tried to get a prescription filled in the past, it's not exactly the easiest thing to do. Even if you are a government official, sometimes you can run into some issues. So
True.
This will essentially make it where anyone can walk into a CVS, Walgreens, grocery store, pharmacy, anywhere where you can get essentially a bottle of Tylenol or some Afrin, and it'll be right there in the nasal spray section, and you can get it and carry it and have it in case of an emergency, essentially.
So one thing I want to mention, and like you and I have a unique perspective, right? Because we work now in this field and we have a lot of information about, but for people who are listening that are wondering like, okay, well, that's all well and good, but like, why do I care? You know, who cares about these people? And they're the ones that did the drugs, right? They're the ones that are ODing. Like, as an aside, I just found out this morning, I had a friend, she's fine, but I had a friend OD last night on something else. And, you know, one of the first responders said to her, like, you know, people like you disgust me. And there is that pervasive belief, I think, about people who use drugs, about addicts, about, you know, in her case, it's actually something that was a prescription that something went wrong. And it was like a complete accident. But, you know, there is that kind of that stigma, right? So like, what are your personal thoughts on why this Narcan being available to so many people is a good thing? You know, what would you say to like the naysayers maybe?
So here's my thought on it too, because I don't want to say that I've ever been that cruel might not even be the right word. I don't want to say I've ever been that cruel, but I feel like maybe there was a time in my life where I might have said like, yeah, you know, you did make that choice and you did, you know,
you reap what you sow. Right.
Exactly.
Sure.
But I can tell you that over my now almost 10 years of working within the addiction field and truly learning and understanding everything that entails, you know, I guess my thing would be to just remind people that while it might seem like, yeah, it's easy to say, oh, well, they chose to take that drug. They chose to get addicted. They chose to continue to do it. That's not entirely true. They might not have chosen to get addicted and they might not be choosing to continue to do it. And many people who are suffering from addiction actually don't want to continue to do it. They actually want to stop and they can't.
Right.
And in the case of opioids, that's particularly unique because so many people who have become addicted to opioids didn't even choose to take the opioid. They were
right. They had surgery or something like that. And it's just like, that's what's created such an epidemic is that folks like, you know, not to shame anybody, but a lot of people that just get started with a prescription medication that don't know any better. They're taking it as directed and they get addicted and, you know, and then it just kind of spirals from there. I mean, it happens.
Absolutely. And even for those that chose to take it for recreational purposes, knowing what they were quote unquote getting into. Right. Also a reminder for people too, addiction is a disease. Addiction is a disease in the same way that fill in the blank with any maybe medication or prescription diabetes, or whatever you're dealing with. Diabetes. Yep. Yeah. So by saying that Narcan shouldn't be available, what you're essentially saying is that your diabetes medication that you're taking today or whatever, any medication that you at home may be taking for anything, and it's nobody's business but your own what you may be taking, but essentially saying that Narcan shouldn't be available is essentially the same thing as saying whatever medication you're taking to fix whatever ailment you might be dealing with shouldn't be available to you. And
right. Well, and at the end of the day, you can't get help if you're dead. And how many stories, because we love, as a society, we love a good redemption arc, right? We love to see, you know, I just saw an article about Elton John celebrating, I want to say it was like 25 years sober or something incredible like that. We love that. We love to like hold these people up and say, look what they've accomplished. But like people can't make those life-changing decisions and they can't get help if they've overdosed. And Narcan is a way to give people that second chance. Like I don't believe anybody deserves to die for struggling with something, you know, and if Narcan can reverse that and it can be available now for people like you and I to have, I think that's fantastic.
Absolutely. And obviously the major question mark that we'll see what happens as things continue to progress and that the FDA themselves even mentioned in hopes that won't ultimately become an issue is what Narcan will be priced at, because while the FDA can approve that it can be sold over the counter, they have no control over what it will cost. That is at the discretion of the manufacturer. And so obviously, if they price point it at too high of a price, they run the risk of pricing out people that may need it and can't afford it. So we'll have to see what happens there. Also, I think it's worth noting too, that as much as we have touted Narcan and talked about how great it is, just a friendly reminder, it is not an actual cure for addiction. All it does is help reverse an overdose as it is happening. So then you can go ahead and get professional help as needed. Also, it is worth noting that in the event that Narcan does have to be used, one potential side effect, I guess you could say, is that once the person gets revived, it does immediately send them into withdrawals and into pretty serious withdrawals. So once again, as always, anytime anyone is suffering in any way medically, while Narcan is great, that does not also substitute calling 911 and getting proper professionals out there, because while you can help resuscitate them with Narcan and with mouth-to-mouth and with any other life-saving tools, obviously nothing replaces trained medical professionals who can do a lot more than you and I can, even with the help of Narcan.
Right. Well, and my understanding too of how it works is, it basically, so it stops your body being able to get any benefit from the opioids you've taken. So it completely reverses it. But I believe it only, I don't know how long exactly, but I believe that is temporary. And so if the person, you give them Narcan, but you don't call, emergency services, eventually their body is like, the Narcan's going to wear off and they're still going to be in a state of opioid withdrawal. And so they're still in danger. So it's also not something that you should just use and then be like, okay, the person's fine. Like it's great to have. And it's kind of like pressing pause on the game, and it pauses the overdose so that medical professionals have time to get there. So I think that's worth noting as well too.
Also, something interesting and I think very good that I learned when we were getting ready to record this today is, you assume because at the end of the day it is a drug, that it might not be able to be used by everyone, but if you are a woman and you are pregnant and you are experiencing this, Narcan is actually safe for pregnant women. So while obviously, that's a whole nother discussion about pregnancy and addiction and whatnot, but it's good to know that it is safe to be used if you are pregnant. So it will not hurt you or it will not hurt the baby. However, they do recommend that if you are pregnant and are getting administered Narcan, that it be done by a professional, because obviously there's dosage issues and want to make sure that everything stays well with you and with the baby and whatnot. So once again, but that goes back to what you're saying. It's not done for you to give it to somebody and be like, okay, let's get up and go to lunch now.
Right. You're fine.
You want to go grab a bite to eat now? Everything is great. Bullet dodge. It is a helpful tool, but it is not meant to take the place of addiction recovery or even medical professionals who can come and help sustain the person and get them all the way better once the initial effects of the overdose have been reversed. Right. So, but we just kind of talked about all the bad things about it, but it's not. I mean, it's not bad. This is. I mean, we have to once again reiterate the fact that this is a major groundbreaking announcement by the FDA, and this has the potential to save. You don't want to be over dramatic, but countless lives that may not have been able to previously be saved.
I think like one of the other things worth talking about too is why this is helpful is just having it on you. Like I don't use opioids. I barely even drink alcohol, but just if I had it on me, who knows, I could be at a concert or whatever. And, if somebody's in an overdose, I could potentially help. And I think that helps overall destigmatize and kind of put the onus on the community a little bit to just, I don't know, like help each other. Maybe that's just me being a little too optimistic and cheesy about it, but I think that that's potentially valuable too, right?
No, you bring up a very, very good point, because I think a lot of people see that article or hear about it and think to themselves, okay, well, I don't take opioids. Nobody in my family takes
my friends
opioids.
don't do drugs.
Why do I need to have this? But realistically, like you said, what this allows for by being able to get it over the counter is anyone can buy it, which means in theory anyone could have it on them. And because of things like the Good Samaritan laws that do exist in this state, if you walk up on somebody having or experiencing an opioid overdose, you are legally allowed to try to help them without any sort of like negative repercussions to you. So even if you do try to help them and something happens unfortunately to them and they don't make it, or they get injured as a result of it, or something else bad happens, like, they can't sue you. Their family can't go after you. Nobody can say, oh, well, had you just left them alone, nothing bad would have happened.
Right.
You have complete and total immunity. So it really does incentivize people to just, like, you keep a thing of chapstick in your purse or in your wallet or in your pocket.
Or like ladies, we carry feminine products. Like,
exactly.
Here you go. Yep.
Exactly. In the same way that you carry that, or you carry chapstick or lipstick or anything really, or even for guys, the same way that you got, whatever we keep around in our pockets or in our cars, like,
right.
It's really easy to just throw a thing in our, granted, once again, we've talked about, we don't know what it's going to be priced at yet. So obviously assuming that it is within your budget and affordable, we're not telling you to go out and, whatnot. But yeah, no, it'll be really accessible, and pretty much anyone can really have it to help out those within the community.
Do we know yet if it's going to be covered by insurance or not?
Well, as an over-the-counter substance, it wouldn't be.
Oh, right.
I don't think it would wouldn't really apply.
I know how medical things work.
Yeah, right. But that is a good question. So that's a good question. Honestly, I actually don't know as of right now how that works as far as medical insurance. But
it's still so new too.
The good news is that pretty soon we won't ever have to wonder about that again, because in theory it will be readily available to anyone that wants it. Of course, it'll also, as it'll be at the discretion of the manufacturer to determine the price. It will obviously, just like everything else in life, it will be at the discretion of your local pharmacy if they choose to want to stock it on the shelves, or if they want to still keep it behind the counter to purchase without a prescription, just to keep it
right.
So they
my
can keep track.
Meds.
Yeah, of course, just so they can keep track of how many they're selling and whatnot, or if they even want to carry it in the first place. Obviously, we hope that every local pharmacy in the United States will be carrying it for those who need it.
Yep.
Before we head to our break, Jess, any final thoughts on Narcan or this FDA announcement?
The only other thing I was thinking that maybe is worth mentioning too is, beyond just the opioid epidemic and people that have an addiction to opioids specifically, another benefit to having this available is problems that we're running into right now with folks like fentanyl, which is an opioid, being cut into a lot of these recreational drugs that people are taking. There was an article, I want to say it was last year, spring break here in Florida, where these kids, they bought some weed, like whatever, they're going to do what they're going to do on spring break. And however, whether it was intentionally put in there or accidentally, there was fentanyl in it, and they went into opioid withdrawal. So just as an additional, like, this could be helpful, if you could be somewhere where the person or people have taken some other drug and, that's your business. I'm not going to judge you. That's not my responsibility. And if you are doing something like that and it's mixed with something like an opioid that's going to hurt you, Narcan can help reverse that. So it's not just addicts who are at risk. It could be young people. It could be folks that just think like, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to try this, whatever. And that's relatively common, whether we like it or not, or whether we are part of that circle or not. Like, it exists, right? And so this is just yet another safety net to help keep people safe.
And like we mentioned too, there are people out there. I mean, opioids at the end of the day still do have a legitimate medical use. They're still prescribed. There are people out there that are still taking them, and it's very, very powerful, very, very addicting drugs. So I mean, even like you said, taking is medically directed. There are still the risks that come along with that you could end up, with an addiction without, through no fault of your own, and doing everything that your doctor told you to do, and it could still end up going wrong. So, once again, just another way to help people out. Yep, all right. Well, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to change it up a little bit. Not that this wasn't fun, but we're going to have a little bit more fun talking about something fun and exciting that happened over the weekend, and we will be right back. And welcome back to the Addiction Help Podcast. I am your host, Dan Hauser, here today again with Jessica Miller. Before we get out of here for the week, we are going to switch it up and talk about something else happening in the world, and that was the Masters this past weekend. As you can see for those watching on video, my little Masters hat I have on here today in honor of the fun tournament that happened this weekend. So once again,
how little I know, Dan. I had no idea that's what that was. So I'm actually excited to learn about this from you.
All right, well, so first off, congrats to John Rahm, who won the coveted green jacket, winning the Masters. He battled the elements, double bogey to start the week, and the likes of Brooks Koepka to win it all yesterday evening. However, the reason why we're talking about this on here, because you're probably thinking, well, what does this have to do with addiction? Well, one of the bigger surprises, you could say, that came out of the weekend was the play of Phil Mickelson, who at the age of 52 years old actually finished in a tie for second. So while we could spend an entire podcast separate from this one, talking about the past year or two he has, for all those sports or golf fans out there know about the ups and downs he has experienced both personally and professionally over the last year or two as it relates to him joining the Saudi-backed Live Golf Tour and the statements he has made about both the PGA Tour and the Saudi government. The reason why I bring this up today is because another thing that Phil Mickelson has been known for over his career is his very, very public relationship with gambling and his enjoyment for gambling. He has been the opposite of shy and very open about how he loves to gamble on pretty much anything and everything. And if somebody will give him an opportunity to gamble on it, he will do it. So I bring this up because now, granted, he has never publicly spoken about it from an addiction standpoint, so we don't know for sure that he struggles at all with it. What we do know is that there has been some stories in the news throughout his life. He has gotten in trouble to the point where he had to return money to the SEC as a result of a insider trading investigation that he got involved with a gambling contact of his. So we do know that he has gotten into some legal trouble as a result of that. Obviously, he has been very open about that he has spent a lot of money over the years on gambling and his gambling fix, you could call it. And so the reason why I bring up today is because it is just another reminder that while we talked about opioids and substances and substance abuse and addiction, there's a whole other subset of addictions out there known as behavioral addictions. They are very real and they are very serious, but they are also very treatable, much like substance abuse and substance addiction, but also need to be treated and taken seriously, because a lot of people joke about it, you're a shopaholic, or you're obsessed with going to the gym, or or sometimes people might use it as an excuse, saying, oh well, I'm addicted to it, but
I'm addicted to video games, Animal Crossing, LOL.
Our phones, social media, so many things that and so many things that potentially even subconsciously we might not realize that we might have a unhealthy relationship. And whether it's a full-blown addiction or just an unhealthy relationship, it's important to remember that just because it's not a physical substance doesn't mean that you can't I'll say it again, have an unhealthy relationship with it, and it potentially get you into some issues in life.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that? Any questions you had for me about the Masters, Jess?
Yeah, well, so I mean, no, I guess my granddad loves golf, and so I at least know the Masters. Okay, that's like a big deal. Sick. Outside of that, I think this is just a really good segue. I read your notes, ahead of time about the gambling addiction and whatnot, and so I thought okay, maybe I'll ask some golf questions. But I think this segued perfectly.
But I think it's I mentioned the Masters Day because it specifically happened over this weekend, but I think it's something, goes beyond just golf into all of sports. And like I said, just life in general, if, there's unhealthy relationships with things and there's healthy relationships with things. And just because you may be having an unhealthy relationship with something doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing.
Sure.
It just means that, you know,
it
you
doesn't
need to
necessarily mean it's addiction, right? Like there
Of
are
course.
varying degrees for it to qualify as an actual addiction.
Listen, there are people out there that are lactose intolerant, and it just means that they can't have dairy products. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's necessarily anything quote unquote wrong with them. It just means that
Sure.
if they have a dairy product, their body might not react in a favorable way to it.
Body's
So they
like,
just
nah.
so they just go about their life saying, okay, great, I can't have dairy products. I'll get lactate. I'll do substitutes. I'll figure out other ways to still be able to enjoy my life without you know, traditional dairy products. So it's the same thing, you know. It's
Right.
it's not.
Some
it's
people
not,
have shopping addiction. There's this. I haven't been on TikTok in a while, but there was this TikToker that I was following that, as part of her therapy for a legitimate diagnosed shopping addiction, she just to background for a second, she had like dozens of those like big storage totes, those big Rubbermaid, like, you know, you put all your Christmas decor and stuff like that in there, tons of them just full of clothes, just tons. And so part of her therapy was getting rid of them. And for every tote that she went through, she had like a really small box and she could only keep what she could fit in the box. And it was just like really interesting, but it's something that like you could see people in the comments not fully understanding, like, girl, you know, you just need to, you know, shop through your sales, or it's not an addiction. And it was very clear that people didn't understand that things like that could be a legitimate addiction. You know, like someone like her has to be very careful, like, you know, to align with your lactose intolerance analogy. Like someone like her needs to be very cognizant of shopping from then on, of, you know, her triggers and things. So it's,
and you
it's
can
a very
actually
real
be
thing.
You can actually be addicted to things that we view as healthy things. I mean, exercise addiction, that's a real thing. And a lot of people think, oh, well, yes, that's the healthiest thing you can do. If I go to the gym 5 times, it's healthy until it becomes not healthy anymore, if that makes sense. Like what you mentioned, like there is a line where you can cross from it being something that, yeah, you're right, getting exercise is a healthy thing and it is good for you in moderation. Everything in life that is the key. In moderation is the key. And,
right.
And if you are somebody that is unable to find that line of moderation or stay within that moderation, once again, as we talked about, it's nothing wrong with it. Just maybe, you know, find other outlets like you mentioned, or as in your example, you know, you buy one little tote and once that's full, you're done and you can't keep going anymore. Right. And, you know, so that was a great example of ways that you can kind of almost train yourself into not, you know, just shop till you drop anymore, so to say, for that, for that specific example.
Well, and that's the key, I think, that, you know, really determines like I want to say it's the DSM-5 that lists 12 different keys for, you know, something actually being an addiction. And what they all really revolve around is that you were obsessed with this activity, whether it's a substance or a behavior, since we're talking about behavioral addiction, that despite it having negative consequences in your life, you don't care. You just got to keep doing it. You got to keep doing it. Whether it's, you know, like maybe in shopping addiction case, it's you're spending all your money, you're going into debt, you're, you know, you're leaving work early so that you can go shop a sale, like to the point that it is impacting so many aspects of your day-to-day life in a bad way, and you're doing it anyway. That's really like the hallmark of what makes something an addiction versus like, maybe it's a bad habit, you know, like going to the gym, like you mentioned, like, you know, are you continuing to injure yourself? Are you, you know, skipping out on like family functions and work and other responsibilities so that you can be at the gym? So that, are you obsessing over your physique to the point that, you know, that's all you do, that's all you think about? Again, that's creating a negative impact on your life, and yet you're doing it anyway. You know, that's where you really need to ask yourself, is this potentially an issue? So back to what you were saying about the gentleman with the gambling potential problem, right? We don't know for sure if it's an addiction, but like, what are some of the hallmarks or maybe examples of issues with gambling as you see it in sports, maybe for him or similar?
Well, so it's a super interesting discussion now too, because the sports leagues have now decided that they are finally ready and willing to take advertising and sponsorship dollars from these online sports books and casinos. So the leagues themselves are taking money from it, but they're also at the same time essentially telling their workers, stay away. Like in baseball, if you bet on baseball, Pete Rose is a very famous example, banned for life from baseball because he bet on baseball. In the NFL, Calvin Ridley, while he was stepped away from the game to address some mental health concerns that he was having, bet on a football game, and they found out about it, and he was suspended for 1 year from the league. So
why? Is that considered insider trading because they are involved in that sport?
Essentially, I mean, yes, while he was not playing, in theory, the argument could be that, well, you obviously know all these players, so you could say to somebody, hey, oh, wait, your starting right tackle isn't playing this week? Okay, great. Well, then I know you guys are going to lose by 20 points and the line's only 15, so now I know exactly which way to go with it. While Pete Rose to this day will say that he only ever bet on the Reds to win while he was managing the Reds, the argument is, well, did it damage the integrity of the game because you were betting on your team, whether it was to win or to lose, because you were betting on your team and you were the manager of your team?
Right.
There's integrity issues and whatnot. In the case of Phil specifically, he's gambled probably more money than I'll ever see in my lifetime over the years on sporting events. He is somebody that during Tuesday practice rounds of tournament week, he will like to go out with another player, maybe play some relatively harmless, gambling games as it pertains to golf, which, for those that are able to do it in moderation, have fun. I know, gambling when you're playing with your buddies on the golf course, it is a big thing. It's a big part of the fun side of the game if so you can do it responsibly. On? But
like I'm, explain like I'm five. I know nothing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So literally, you could just bet on who has the lowest score each hole, who has the lowest score at the end of the round. There are some more complicated, or not more more nuanced. More nuanced betting games that go into way more detail that we have here. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much anything. If something can be done, I mean, you could literally...
You can bet on any... Like, I bet I'll make the shot,
Exactly. I bet you I'll make this putt. I bet you I'll make it on the green. I bet you don't. I bet you end up in the bunker.
I'll birdie this next hole, which I do actually know what that means.
There you go. You got the lingo down there. But yeah, I mean, there's, so it's... Once again, it just goes back to moderation, healthy versus unhealthy relationships. And of course, there's also, personality traits are also involved in addiction and whatnot, obviously too. If somebody has, quote unquote addictive personality, it might be tougher for them to stop once they've gotten started with something. So there's a whole lot of
people like me that have ADHD that we can get, hyper focused, obsessive, right? Like ADHD podcast.
Yeah, right.
That, you can get hyper focused on something and then become addicted to something without realizing as well,
But once again, though, if we take the time to kind of hone in what that does to us and use it for good instead of evil,
yes, right?
It can actually be to our benefit too.
And it comes down to self-awareness too.
Of course, like this podcast, we are like in the zone here, but it's because we're channeling all of our ADD-ness into what we're doing at the moment. So.
Exactly. Right. Now, if we're still talking 4 hours from now, we might need to take a little look at, Well, that being said, I have no other questions or anything. So,
all right. Well, on that note, now that we have just completely gone way off into the distance here, that will do it for today's show. So, thank you to Jess for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you liked what you have heard today, be sure to subscribe to our podcast feed wherever you are listening to this podcast today, and please rate and review. Should that option be available to you? I know each podcast platform has different ways of going about subscribing or rating, reviewing, whatever that particular one likes to call it. Tune in next week where we will tackle a couple more hot topics that have come up over these past few days that pertain to the addiction and mental health field. As always, please don't forget, if you or a loved one is struggling with substance abuse, addiction, or mental health. Help is always available. There are people out there that want to help you. I promise you, even if you don't think there are people out there are people out there that want to help you. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA, they have some great resources out there. Should you want to try to find somebody to help you and not know where to look, you can call their helpline at 1-800-662-4357, or you can also visit their online program locator to find someone in your area, and that is at findtreatment.samhsa.gov. Once again, that is findtreatment.samhsa.gov. And we'll talk to you guys next week. Have a good week, everyone.